Welcome to Underdubs, a podcast about 70s progressive rock and more. This podcast is a conversational music variety show with a focus on the classic progressive rock artists of the 1970s and how their music has shaped culture, technology, and the music of today. We'll, of course, cover the classic prog bands like Yes and Genesis, but also other forms like the Canterbury scene, neo-prog, proto-prog, and fusion, and all points in between. Your hosts, Brian Donahue and Pat Strauser, are two of the founding members of the instrumental progressive rock fusion band Volare, based in Athens, Georgia, from the mid-1990s. In this episode, we speak to Mike Sary of French TV. We talk about his musical background, the history of the band and its ever-changing lineup, the band's discography, and much more. Be sure to check out the links that we provide in the notes for playlists and other content that we discuss here. We hope you enjoy the show. I'm very excited about today's guest. We have today a good friend of mine and yours, who we've known for many years, a gentleman who is no stranger to most people who are deeply familiar with the progressive rock underground. He is the band leader and mastermind behind none other than the Louisville, Kentucky-based French TV Band of Destiny, Mike Sary. Good to have you on the Underdubs show. How are you doing, dude?
I'm super thrilled to be here.
Hi, Mike. Good to see you.
Well, I wanted to ask you a few questions about like where you came.
I didn't do it.
You didn't do it. Nobody saw you do it. You can't prove anything. And photographs can be doctored. I wanted to know a little bit about your background, like where you came from, when you got started with music.
It would probably be my senior year of high school. I sort of fell in with the wrong crowd who allowed me to play their drum kit. And so I have a distinct memory of getting a bunch of Very Cold Duck, booze, and playing Susie Q by Creedence for about 6 hours. But that was basically the first opportunity I had to ever, touch a musical instrument. You know, we grew up on a farm.
Is this in Kentucky, Mike? Where'd you grow up?
No, this would have been Peoria, Illinois. Yeah, I was there for, all the way through high school.
Okay.
And then after that, joined the Army and was all over the place there.
Mm-hmm.
The base that I was on, Fort Hood, Texas.
Okay, yeah.
Which is sort of midway between Austin and Fort Worth. They had these big rec centers, sort of converted theaters, movie theaters, that they turned into rehearsal areas for musicians. And, you had a nice size stage where, you could set up and crank out whatever it is you want to crank out.
So were you on bass guitar by this point?
Yeah. I'd played drums initially, and then maybe about half a year into the Army, I realized how impractical a drum kit could be, because I was living in these, four-man barracks, and basically you just have one locker to keep everything in. And so I thought, well, maybe I need to play something a little tinier. And, this thing only has 4 strings on it. Let's see if this works. And, stuck with it ever since.
So what kind of stuff were you guys playing? Just kind of like stuff on the radio or?
Yeah, I mean, it was mainly hard rock type stuff.
Okay.
A lot of Foghat and Mountain and Aerosmith, James Gang, dirty torn up jeans music with a side order of plaid shirt. Although we all had Army haircuts, so we didn't look that hip.
I've taken to calling it truck stop rock. You remember when you could stop on the side of the road, on the interstate on a road trip, and you would go into a truck stop or some place like that, and you'd have the classic rock compilations, and it would all be that kind of stuff, truck stop rock. So
yeah, and it would never be cassettes of the actual artist. They were always
right.
These thrown together compilations.
Yeah. Right. So what happens after the Army? When do you where do you end up after that? After Fort Hood?
It was funny. Getting out of the Army, I didn't have a plan whatsoever. All I knew was no more haircuts.
Right.
But at some point, I got a little homesick. I did the offshore thing for the better part of a year, and then moved back to Peoria for another year. Going to the local music store and looking at the ads that people were posting, and there was this drummer who was this maniac speed freak. But he was fun to. It was my first real situation where we did a lot of improvisation, and this guy happened to be from Louisville. This would have been the early '80s, I guess. Okay. And musically, it seemed to have a lot more going on than Peoria. And so, at some point, he talked me into moving there, and been there ever since.
Tell us a little bit about how French TV comes to the surface, and that how does that start?
I don't know how I heard about it, but there was this musical event happening. There was this band playing, and they were kind of punky and noisy. I wasn't that crazy about it, but I was watching the drummer and thinking, boy, there's a lot of Brufordisms going on there, overtly Brufordisms. And afterwards, I talked to the guy, and it turned out to be Steve Roberts. A month or two later, I went to this local record store, and son of a gun, if he isn't behind the counter, he's playing Vandergraaf Generator over the store PA, and nobody blinks. Them was the days. And so, I let it slip that, oh, well, I play bass. And he said, oh, and, we agreed, oh, we ought to get together. I hadn't really even considered writing anything yet, but, original music. I guess I should do something. Right. And so I cobbled together a bunch of riffs, and here's a song. And then Steve also knew this guy who played Jeff Jones, who also played keyboards and sax. And so we got together. Jeff had a bunch of tunes, and it was one of those things where that's all you wanted to do was get together with these guys and work on these new tunes. There were a number of punk type clubs that you could get away with what we were doing. That band was called Festung America. The keyboard player came up with that. And so we carried on doing that for 6 months or so. So, that band kind of drifted apart. Me and Steve wanted to continue playing together. I had kind of fallen in with these two brothers, the Kastner brothers, Bo, who played guitar, Fenner, who played drums.
Okay, yeah.
In turn, Fenner knew a guitarist. Both he and this guitarist were still in high school at the time. They were like, 16 and 17 years old. And, wow. And Artie Bratton was sort of this Eddie Van Halen, Steve Vai, shredder type disciple. And so it turned into a band. We wrote a bunch of tunes. Steve was involved in he had his own mail order record company, ZNR Records. And so he kind of knew the ins and outs of what to do if you're an independent band that wants to put out your own record. And there were a lot. So he knew a lot of distributors and that sort of thing. And it just turned into a whole, well, let's record an album. Let's press an album. Let's do it on the cheap and actually have to physically fold and glue the covers together.
Steve Roberts sounds to me like he was very much a co-pilot of the band.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was kind of his baby at first. Although, I would probably characterize it like a 60-40 thing. In that, Steve was a composition major at U of L. He knew his way around multiple instruments. He also played trumpet. Plus, he had this insider view of, how a record gets put out and in other people's hands. Basically, my job was to say, Steve, that's a great idea. We should do that.
This first lineup didn't last a whole heck of a long time. Is that true?
Yeah, Steve had gotten married, plus he had his mail order CD or album business. And there just wasn't enough time in the day for him to really put the effort into French TV as he would have liked. And then complicating the things was that both Fenner and Artie graduated from high school and were going on to college out of town. Hmm. And so, here was this band that had sort of a meager reputation, but it was kind of fell into my lap. And it's like, gee, how do I keep this going? Whenever Fenner and Artie were home from college during the summer, I managed to rope them into the next two records. The studio guy that I'm still recording at, Howie Gano, was kind of helpful in that he knew a lot of session type musicians here in town. So, it continued to kind of limp along. And then maybe about the time of the third album, somehow I got involved with a bunch of musicians who basically came out of, there's a local small college here called Bellarmine that has a serious music department. The next lineup of the live version of French TV, a lot of the people went there. We kept lucking into, there were like 4 or 5, local clubs that, would book bands that were doing weird stuff like this. Not that there was any sort of progressive scene here in Louisville, but we were just weird enough to get away with what we did. We didn't particularly sound like, Yes or ELP or that sort of thing. We were just amateurish enough for them to think, oh, these guys are punks in their own way too. Mm-hmm.
So by the fourth album, you were carrying the torch completely, basically, and you.
Yeah, although when Fenner and Artie, it's not like they were carrying even a lighter. It was basically, hey Fenner, hey Artie, I've got these tunes, let's work on them. Okay, and that was the end. Okay. So it was up to me to run around and score gigs and pay for studio time and
right.
inflict weird compositions on other people.
So I think my first introduction to French TV music is the record Intestinal Fortitude. That's when Brian and I kind of wander into your orbit a bit. The three of us actually have a pretty long-standing relationship starting around 1996, when we all played together at the Eclectic Electric event in July, of 1996 in Louisville, Kentucky. Were you a part of putting that event together? I felt like you were, but I can't remember now.
Yeah, it was kind of me, Steve, and Joey Conroy.
Okay.
From the band who agreed, who kind of put that together. That was a kind of amazing time when you think about it. In that, when French TV came along, there really weren't. Well, I shouldn't say there weren't any, but we weren't really that aware of each other in terms of, U.S. independent progressive bands. And so there wasn't that much in the way of any sort of, interconnectedness. And then that sort of changed in the mid 90s. And, suddenly it was, Steve having, I guess you guys had put out a cassette. Mm-hmm. And I guess Steve had agreed to distribute it, and he was like, hey man, check this band out. They kind of sound like Hatfield. It's like, oh, nice. And then Boudin, mm-hmm. they were touring like crazy. They were doing,
Mhm.
between 50, 60, 70 gigs a year, because, Sean Persinger was a born networker. It was just this kind of, well, what if we got all these independent bands together in one spot and see what happens?
So Brian and I playing in Volare, that was our first big gig, which is funny to think of it as.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, we had played gigs, but it was our first gig in front of people that mean to show up to listen to this kind of music. So we'd done little, like, played at a sandwich shop down the street and, opened up for like a friend's band and stuff like that. But this was the first time where it was like, oh, wait, the people in this audience came to see this particular kind of music.
Yeah, they're going to know our references when we throw them in.
Right. We weren't just like some wacky instrumental music where people are like, why don't you get a singer? It wasn't. People understood us. We felt heard. So, in pretty short order, this is the summer of 96 when we all meet and do this show with you. And then later on in the fall of 96, you guys come down to Athens, Georgia, where we are, and do a couple of club dates. And then again in Baltimore in 1997.
Right.
And then Prague Day 1997 happens. Now, Brian, you and I both sat in with Mike. I'm trying to remember why it happened.
After meeting with French TV a few times, and Volare was scheduled to play Prague Day 97, which was Labor Day weekend. And I guess French TV was on the bill, but maybe you couldn't find a drummer. So you would ask me, hey, I know you're going to be there anyway. Can you learn these tunes and join us up there since you're going to be up there? And then we can also play the gig. And I'm like, I'm just dumb enough to say I can do both things and I'll be good. So I rehearsed kind of on my own, but Pat and I still shared the Volare practice space. So he was very helpful. He would help me run through some stuff, and then to get me over the hump, John Robinson, your keyboard player, came down from Kentucky and spent, I guess, a weekend with us and helped me rehearse some tunes. You remember that?
I do. Yeah. He stayed at my house.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then, so when it comes time to the Chapel Hill gig, and I don't think Pat was supposed to be on stage, but John Robinson didn't have a car or something and didn't get to the gig on time, right?
Yeah. Well, to backtrack, as I recall, Pat, I thought you were going to be playing with us, from the get-go.
Oh, okay. Well,
we were going to have two keyboardists.
Yeah. I do remember, as far as the back line, both keyboard rigs were on the stage. And I think what happened is John was held up. He did show up and play part of the gig, I think.
Yeah. Well, to this day, I don't understand his logic, but that's John. He thought, he was under the impression that we would meet him at the hotel and then go to Prague Day together. And it's like, no, we got separated. Why wouldn't you just go to the gig and we meet there? And then halfway through the set, there comes John trudging up to the stage. And I think I said something like, the pizza delivery guy's here.
Oh, man. So that's the close to the Volare chapter for us, but not for our involvement with you, Mike. We kind of walk into the future with French TV in various and sundry ways.
Well, I remember when I flew up to Louisville and we recorded, I think, 3 tunes at Howie's studio, all in the same day, I think. And then we also had a mini tour scheduled, but it fell through for various reasons. But we did play one gig when I was up there that time at a record store. We did like an in-store mini performance. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And what album is this you're talking about? Is this
the 6th one, The Violence of Amateurs?
Violence of Amateurs. Now that one, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, does that Is that the one that features the Odessa Steps sequence?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. Not the first time that song will show up on a French TV record, I might add.
Which is a fascinating bit of trivia, because I can't think of another band that covered another band twice on 2 studio records, the same song.
Right.
And plus, we've got the Brian version, and then later we had the Pat version.
That's right. And
that's right.
And I want to say that we played that at Prog Day in '97, and I do know that we played it in. We're jumping ahead in the timeline here briefly, but in 2018 when we played at Progtoberfest. So I played with French.
Yeah, in Chicago.
Yeah, but we'll get to that later. So all right. So Violence of Amateurs is what, 99, 2000, right? And that's
99.
Yeah,
think, right?
99.
Okay.
Yeah, after the 6th album, I finally lucked into a pretty solid lineup for 3 or 4 records. We did our first actual cross country tour not long after the 6th album. I can't remember how exactly I hooked up with Warren Dale, but I think he was helping to sponsor the San Diego date. And he's a woodwinds and sax player. Oh, well, what if you learned a bunch of French TV tunes and played with us for the California dates? And so obviously the next step was, Warren, you should play keyboards on our next CD. And so he did, and so that was a pretty stable lineup. So that was a pretty solid chunk of French TV there.
Yeah, and those are good records too. So if we go forward in 2012, and I'm still here in North Carolina, my phone rings after a lengthy silence, and it's Mike Sary, and he says, "We've got this tour of France scheduled, and our drummer can't make it. Would you be interested in learning these songs and going to France?"
Yeah, we played more than just France.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, but we were headquartered in France.
Yeah.
But that wasn't your first tour of Europe. You'd been to Europe before that, right?
Yeah, twice beforehand. The first time was mainly for this big festival, the Gouveia Festival in Portugal. And then we did a couple of Italian dates. And it's kind of funny because we booked the tour and then a couple of dates fell through. And then our Italian keyboard player, Paolo Botta, got us a gig at this political rally. And, and I kept asking, well, who are the candidates? What are their politics? And so, and he didn't know. Yeah, it was funny. There I am on stage urging people to vote for this communist candidate I knew nothing about whatsoever.
He didn't say, "You're doing it for the good of the party." It sounds like French TV was primarily like playing fairly localized shows here and there, not a lot of touring.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of doing 5 gigs in a row anywhere was just alien to us.
Right.
Oh, we play weird music. That can't be done. Thankfully for the internet and, being able to hook up with, local bands in various cities or fans in other cities. We were able to, put together a bunch of dates in a row. I remember the first time we did a tour of the United States. We did like 10 dates. Oh, wow. And at the end of the tour, we were finished. We come back to Louisville. And I remember turning to Warren and saying, "Man, I feel like we just pulled a heist." And I still get that feeling, at the end of when we tour. It's like, how'd we get away with that?
Right.
You're not supposed to be able to do that stuff.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, from my own experience in the French TV lineup in 2012 and that, I have some funny memories, some fond, funny memories of that short tour of Western Europe. Mike, tell me what you think of when I say gypsies stole our laptop?
No idea the nationality, but right in front of our faces, that's the thing that kills me. And we had all our gear piled in like the middle of this room. It wasn't a large venue. And there's this one dude, he looked a little tipsy and he had, like a little plastic cup of beer or whatever, and kind of toasted us, There was this interesting vibe going on where the guy who put together the gig for us, he had a record store right next to it. So after the gig, he set up a little DJ station, and I still remember it. It's one of those indelible memories, and it was kind of this kind of weird 60s psychedelic vibe to it. And I don't know if it was, the endorphins from the gig or whatever. And I'm just sitting on the couch thinking, this is the greatest music I've ever heard in my life. And we're just sitting here spacing out to this psychedelic music. And that dude, right under our noses, must have grabbed Ludo's, the violinist, iPad / laptop, whatever you'd call it. We're all blissed out. And suddenly I hear all this commotion and people yelling, "Hey!" And this dude's running off with what he'd stole. And 5 or 6 of us are running out the door, daring down these French alleyways after him. And it was just this merry chase for a while until I realized I was in my 50s and can't do this sort of thing.
On that laptop, we had been recording the gigs as we went on the tour.
Yeah, correct.
And the plan was to record every gig, and then at the end we'd maybe have something to put together, whatever you wanted, live release or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that is the missing French TV live album that shall never be heard.
I know. And as I recall, the recordings came out pretty good.
So bringing us back into more current times. So Brian, you kind of closed your chapter there in 2012. So Mike, I know I came on board, I think in 2017 or 18, somewhere in there. What happens in those intervening years?
That's when I called you.
Oh, okay.
This would have been prior to the Ambassadors of Good Health and Clean Living album.
Yeah.
That was the first album where, I was actually working with, keyboard and drum loops to create the tunes. So, you were the first guy I thought of as far as a keyboardist goes. Did it get to the stage where I actually sent you the stuff, or did you say no right away?
Well, the way I remember it, and feel free to correct me because we know that I don't remember things accurately. My recollection is that you and I had been kind of in touch, very sporadically, maybe once a year or something like that. Yeah. You said, "Hey, I've got some stuff I wanted to see if you'd think of recording on it." And at the time, I was very interested in getting into that because I was trying to build a studio to do tracks, and I wanted to get into that. So when I got it and I heard it, I was expecting, I guess you'd say I was expecting maybe not something simple, but I was expecting, well, here's a verse and here's a chorus. I wasn't expecting what you sent me. I'll say that. because what you had, and I actually think this is kind of an interesting thing to talk about, is that your writing process. So what you sent me was, if I remember correctly, drum parts and bass and some harmonic or some other kind of material kind of slipped in there. I found out.
With little sequenced keyboard bits.
Yeah. So maybe like some chord stabs or something like that. But it was all
effects.
Yeah, it was all very crazy sounding to me. Which at that time I was living very much in the kind of cover band world. So I'm learning pop songs and something simple Otis Redding tunes and things like this. Yeah. And so,
were you doing the Elton John thing at the time?
Oh yeah. I've been doing that for years at this point. And so when I heard that, I was like, I have no idea really what to contribute here. And so I remember declining the offer. And then I think you came back, I guess, a year later and you did offer me a little bit of cash, and you said, well, how much would it cost to get you involved? And I said, well, I mean, if we're talking some money, then I'll take a stab at it. And that's where I had to, it took me a second to kind of like wrap my head around how to approach it. You know, I think like a live player, like how do I construct a part that I might be able to, like, I'm going to learn this song and then I'm going to play a part that I might play live, something like that. Like you would on stage, not necessarily like let's piece things together one little note at a time, like Photoshop or Pro Tools or Logic, where I can just very, very meticulously track this out and take your time with it. And so when I figured out that I could do that, it changed the game. And I thought, oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm in it for that. And so that's when I decided I could contribute something. So are you saying this is the first time you took that approach to composing and arranging these tunes for French TV?
Yeah. It's funny the way, my compositional skills, I don't know if they've like improved or or anything, but it has definitely changed. Back in the early days, I would string together a bunch of riffs. It would be a live situation where, well, what if I did this? What would you do? And the other person would respond ideally. You'd have a couple of rehearsals and suddenly you've kind of got the makings of a solid tune.
Right.
And then when Warren and Chris came along, they were based in San Diego, while me and the drummer were based here in Louisville. And so I would get together with the drummer. We would do these improvs and record them, and then I'd kind of sift through the improvs and figure out, if there were good moments in them that could be developed, or sometimes I would just go through an improv and keep the structure, but just kind of whittle away the fat from it.
Right.
And so that was my compositional process then. And then around the time when I asked you to get involved, I didn't even have a drummer at the time. And I'd sort of got curious about this idea of, taking drum samples and loops and libraries. And I started to stockpile those, stick some bass on it that seemed to make sense. And then, well, what happens after we do this 8 times?
Right.
Would you continue with a different loop or stretch this? Does this need to be stretched out? And so it was it was kind of the blind leading the blind.
Right.
It sort of came up when we did the gig in 2018. I thought, well, let's go through the more recent albums and see what might work live. And it was listening to those two. It's like, no, this cannot be played by human beings.
Right. I was actually petrified because for a long time leading up to rehearsal at your house prior to the gig, I thought, well, there's no way this can happen. I didn't write this. I mean, even my own parts that I wrote, I was like, the way I had to compose it and record it was very much almost like a bar at a time. I actually had to take all of these arrangements, even the old ones, and I had to make charts. I hadn't really relied on charts very much in a lot of the music that I play because it's so easy. You don't really need charts, Not the case here. So I had to transcribe all of this stuff and come up with some kind of reduction where it's like, okay, we'll play these parts. And I was super pleased with it because I thought, and also it was an interesting, from the compositional arrangement standpoint, like creating the record was an interesting experience, where we passed the hat around the way you proceeded with just the writing of the song, where it was like, all right, well, I got bass and drums. Let's see what happens when we hand it to the guitar player, or let's see what happens when we hand it to the keyboard player, or let's see what happens when we have the bass. Because some of it, I think you had like drums and you would send it to me first, or you would send it to, at this point,
Yeah. As an experiment, I thought it'd be well, what if I didn't write the bass on this thing?
Yeah.
And so I would send you guys the drum / sequenced keyboards, and you guys would add your stuff. And for a change, I was the last guy to add anything. It's like, okay, this is what I have to do on bass.
Right.
This isn't something I would have come up with, but
That's made the whole experience pretty interesting to me. So,
And Pat, how many CDs have you done with French TV now?
to date, let's see, we started with Operation Mockingbird in 2017. Then it was
Stories Without
Fingerprints, which was, I think, the next one, and that was a double album. Then there is All Our Failures Are Behind Us, which is 2021. And then the most recent one is A Ghastly State of Affairs, which is, did you say November, Mike, of 2023?
Yeah.
This is the first one that was carried by a record label, right?
Yep.
How did that come about after many years of self-releasing to hook up with Cuneiform Records for the most recent French TV CD?
Well, funny enough, it was basically the tune you took the lead on, Pat. Prior to that, I was just sort of resigned to the fact that, French TV stuff is just a little too prickly for labels to deal with. I'd talked to a couple of minor labels in the past, and nothing ever came of it. And plus, it's not like, putting stuff out myself has been catastrophic. The stuff sells well enough to justify putting out the next one. But when we were well into recording this one, there was just something about it where I thought, this one doesn't have, this one actually, its hair is pretty combed and it's reasonably well groomed. And I think more people might like this one than, who normally does. I was also getting a little frustrated. A little while ago, I was talking about how super duper the internet is. But I'd kind of noticed over the last few years where, there were tons of progressive magazines at one point. There were tons of radio shows. There were tons of distributors. And gradually that's been whittled away to, just a few. And so I was increasingly running into these brick walls as far as trying to, keep the band's name out there and give it the promotion it deserves. So that coupled with the idea that, this one was a little more impeccably groomed than the others, I thought, well, maybe Cuneiform might be able to do something with this one. And so I sent him, some recordings of what we'd done. He listened to it over the weekend and said, okay, I have some questions, but I think we ought to do this.
Cool.
So Ghastly State is the one that's on Cuneiform. It's doing really well. Lots of pretty positive press, like reviews that we're getting, many of which are not in English, which is great. Those are the folks that love this stuff. So
I'm cool with that.
I'm loving it. Google Translate has been working overtime. Let me tell you. So I guess there are two projects that we're working on right now. The one that we're sort of in the middle of and wrapping up. And I promise I will be getting you more tracks sooner rather than later. But there's I guess the one that we're in the middle of production right now is a set. Yeah, it's a set of cover tunes. How would you describe stylistically these tunes, Mike?
I wanted them to be from that late 60s, early 70s era. I wanted them to be bands that were no longer in existence.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them are fairly well-known bands who are known for, stuff that they had on the radio. These are kind of longish, you could call them progressive. They sort of have that criteria of having, different movements. They're being a little longer than most of the pop stuff that they did.
I've even been using the term proto-prog. So they're like, because it's all like 68, 69, 70, I guess you'd call them deep cuts. I mean, a couple of them people have probably heard of before, but bands like Jay Giles, James Gang, Steppenwolf, Traffic, Mountain, kind of like hard rock for the time, right? It's not like super simple tunes like you would expect from James Gang or whatever, but it's like, oh, well, this is sort of sophisticated for this band. It's not as complicated as Heart of the Sunrise or some of, your sort of stereotypical prog rock band type stuff. It's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it's kind of prog adjacent.
Right. And I really dug working on this stuff. It's sort of raw. I think it's going to be a really great record. So I really enjoyed working on it. So that's the project we're working on right now. And then the one in the summer is going to be really a more full-fledged, typical French TV fare, if you want to put it that way. So
Yeah.
The plan right now is to go to Spain in July.
Ooh.
Is it July or August?
Yeah.
And cut some basic tracks at a countryside recording studio. I sadly will not be able to join. I think it's just I know it's terrible. It's just slightly outside of my the range of my available motion at the moment. But we do have. I think you have some basic sketches for that material. Is that right, Mike? You sent me some stuff
it's
already.
pretty similar to what I've sent you guys before. I don't know how they're going to, as usual, I have no idea how they're going to turn out. The guy who runs the studio is a drummer, or maybe the drummer who runs the studio, depending on how you look at it. He's going to be the drummer for this thing.
Cool. Well, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out.
Yeah. It's just a shame you're not going to be there, Pat.
I know it's we'll have to construct a cardboard cutout that we can send. I'll just sit in the corner looking like a Jim Carrey stunt double.
It's not a bad idea because there will be band photos.
Well, see, yeah. I mean, I gotta get in there somehow. So, well, man, Mike, thank you so much for doing this with us. This has been great, and we'll be dropping links to all of the various and sundry French TV websites and music that you can check us out.
Good luck with the projects coming up later this year. That sounds exciting.
Well, thank you. I think when I was giving Pat the initial recruiting, I had told him that, I was, growing up, you tend to romanticize, these guys, Led Zeppelin or whoever, go off to the countryside and create a mess, something that's going to hold up for 50 years. And always wondered, man, what would that be like? And so
Gotta get it together in the country.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. So this has been one of my bucket list things.
This is our Headley Grange moment.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Pat.
See you, dude. Thanks for joining us again on this episode of Underdubs. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.